I used to think community was a nice-to-have something you added after product market fit, after revenue, after survival. That belief cost me years. I learned the power of community the same way I learned most hard truths in startups, by ignoring it until everything else stopped working. When acquisition costs climbed, when ads lost efficiency, when features stopped moving the needle, I finally noticed the quiet group of users who stayed anyway, who answered other users' questions faster than our support team, who defended the product online without being asked, and who felt personally offended when we broke something. That was the moment I realized we hadn't built a product with users. We had accidentally built a community despite ourselves. Most founders misunderstand loyalty. They think it comes from discounts, points, or clever retention tactics. That's not loyalty. That's bribery with better branding. Real loyalty is emotional, and emotion doesn't come from features alone. It comes from identity. People stay when your product becomes part of how they see themselves. When leaving feels like losing a place where they belong. Communities form when users stop asking, "Is this useful?" and start asking, "Is this us?" That shift is subtle, and you can't force it with pop-ups or gamification. You earn it by showing up consistently, especially when it's inconvenient. In the early days, we treated users like data points, not maliciously, just practically. We tracked behavior-optimized funnels, reduced friction, all the right things on paper. But we rarely talked to them unless something broke. Feedback was extracted, not invited. When users left, we labeled it churn and moved on. What we didn't see was that every departure was also a story being told somewhere else, and every retained user was a story waiting to be amplified if we gave them a reason. Community is the compound interest of trust, but like all compounding effects, it grows invisibly at first and tests your patience before it rewards you. The first deliberate step we took toward building community wasn't a forum or a Slack group. It was ownership. We started telling users what we were struggling with, not in a performative way, but honestly. We shared roadmap trade-offs. We admitted mistakes before users discovered them. Something unexpected happened. Instead of losing confidence, users leaned in. They offered suggestions, defended delays, and adjusted expectations. Transparency didn't weaken our position. It recruited allies. People don't need perfection. They need sincerity and the feeling that they're inside the room, not being managed from the outside. As the product matured, the community took on a life of its own. Power users emerged, not because we crowned them, but because others listened to them. Norms formed. Certain behaviors were encouraged, others quietly discouraged, and none of this was written down at first. This is where many founders panic and try to impose control, but communities suffocate under heavy hands. Your job isn't to dominate the conversation, it's to protect the culture. You step in not to lead every discussion, but to set boundaries, reinforce values, and make sure the loudest voices don't drown out the most thoughtful ones. What surprised me most was how community changed the economics of the business. Support costs dropped because users helped each other. Retention improved because relationships formed inside the product, not just transactions. Marketing became less desperate because stories traveled faster when they were told by peers instead of brands. But the real shift was internal. Building community forced us to think long-term. You can't exploit a group you plan to face every day. You can't hide bad decisions when people talk to each other. Community acts as a moral constraint, and that's uncomfortable for founders who want optionality, but it's invaluable for companies that want endurance. There's a darker side too, and it needs to be said. Communities magnify whatever you are. If your incentives are misaligned, if your values are vague, if your leadership avoids accountability, the community will reflect that back at scale. I've seen passionate groups turn toxic because founders fed growth without stewardship. I've seen loyal users feel betrayed when companies chased monetization without conversation. Community is not an asset you own, it's a relationship you maintain. Neglect it, and it will either decay or turn against you quietly at first, then all at once. The power of community isn't in engagement metrics or member counts, it's in resilience. When markets shift, when competitors copy features, when platforms change, rules, communities hold. They forgive missteps that would kill trust elsewhere. They give you time to recover. They stay when others leave, not because they're trapped, but because they choose to. That choice is the most fragile and valuable thing you can earn in business, and it's built interaction by interaction, moment by moment over years, not campaigns. If you're early, this is the part most people skip because it doesn't scale cleanly. Talking to users doesn't feel like leverage. Listening doesn't show up on dashboards. But every strong community I've seen started the same way: a founder who cared enough to be present before there was applause, before there were systems, before it was efficient. That presence compounds quietly until one day you realize your users are no longer just consuming what you built. They are defending it, improving it, and carrying it forward in ways you never could alone. And that is when you understand that the real power of community is not that it supports your product, but that it changes your role as a founder from builder to steward. And that transition is where the story truly tightens. Because once people invest emotionally, you are no longer free to act only in your own interest. And every decision now echoes beyond spreadsheets and roadmaps and lands inside a group of people who trusted you enough to belong. And from that moment on, the journey moves into a far more demanding phase, where loyalty stops being flattering and starts being heavy, because it comes with expectations and responsibilities that cannot be ignored. And this is exactly where the next part begins, as you take a breath and realize that building a loyal user base means you are now accountable to something larger than your original vision. And the sentence does not end here, but carries forward into what that accountability really costs, and what it ultimately gives back when tested, under pressure and time. And larger than your original vision, because once people belong, they don't just use what you build, they attach meaning to it, and that meaning turns into expectation, and expectation is weight that never goes away. It only grows as the community grows, and this is where many founders quietly wish they could go back to the days when users were anonymous numbers on a dashboard, because numbers don't feel disappointed when you change direction, but people do. And I felt that tension the first time we had to make a decision that was good for the business in the short term, but confusing, even painful, for a segment of our most loyal users who had helped us survive the early chaos. What followed taught me more about leadership than any book ever could. We could have hidden behind legal language, shipped the change, and dealt with the backlash later, like many companies do. Instead, we chose the harder path and talked to the community before the decision was final. We explained the constraints, the risks, and the trade-offs, not to ask permission, but to show respect. Some people disagreed loudly. A few left. But something deeper happened underneath the noise. Trust increased. The community realized they were not being managed, they were being treated as adults. That moment set a precedent. From then on, difficult conversations became part of our culture, not a crisis to be avoided. This is the real cost of building a loyal user base. You lose the ability to move silently. Every decision becomes relational. You are no longer optimizing only for outcomes, but for process. How you decide matters as much as what you decide. Founders who crave absolute control struggle here. They see community feedback as friction instead of signal. But those who endure learn to separate noise from wisdom, to listen without being paralyzed, to lead without pretending they have all the answers. Community doesn't mean democracy, but it does mean accountability, and accountability changes how you show up every day. Over time, the community began to act as an early warning system. When something felt off, we heard about it before metrics dipped. When messaging drifted from reality, users called it out. When we made a mistake, the tone of feedback told us whether we had damaged trust or just tested patience. This feedback loop was not always comfortable, but it was incredibly efficient. While competitors spent money on market research and consultants, we had a living, breathing group of people telling us exactly where we were losing alignment. If we were brave enough to listen, there is a myth that strong communities limit growth, that they slow companies down with opinions and edge cases. The opposite is true when they are healthy. Communities don't resist change. They resist being ignored. When people understand the why, they tolerate the how. When they feel respected, they extend grace. But when they feel used, they turn cold fast. I've watched brands lose years of goodwill in a single quarter by prioritizing monetization over conversation. Once trust cracks no amount of features or campaigns can glue it back together the same way. The founders who truly understand the power of community stop asking how to extract more value from users and start asking how to create more value with them. That shift transforms everything. Product roadmaps include community impact. Growth strategies consider cultural fit. Hiring decisions account for whether someone can represent the values, not just execute tasks. Community becomes the invisible infrastructure that holds the company together when external conditions get rough, when funding dries up, when competitors get louder, when mistakes are made, because mistakes will be made. And the difference between recovery and collapse is often whether people believe you are still acting in good faith. In the end, building a loyal user base is not about scale, it's about depth. 10,000 people who care will carry you further than 1 million who don't. Loyalty is not something you engineer, it's something you earn repeatedly. And the paradox is that the more you honor your community, the more freedom you actually gain. Because trust buys you time, and time is the rarest currency in startups. Time to fix things, time to adapt, time to grow the right way. If this story resonates, if you're feeling the weight of responsibility that comes with users who truly care, leave a comment and share what your community has taught you so far. And if you want to keep learning how to build companies that last without burning trust, along the way, subscribe and stay close, because the journey only gets harder from here, but it also gets more meaningful when you stop building alone and start carrying the responsibility together.